Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of EXCL Garage. So hopefully you guys would have caught the last episode that aired previously. And if you did, you would have seen that we've got the GT86 back. It's had its engine bay painted, looks absolutely fantastic. And we started putting back together the engine bay, including all the wiring, brake lines, made a custom heat shield for the transmission tunnel, everything. And all it leaves now is to start laying the groundwork to get the engine in. So super exciting. I'm a little bit worried that I'm forgetting things as we go. But what's to come in this episode is we're going to get the flywheel and clutch on the engine. We're going to get the gearbox mount in the car. And I've got a little trick to do alongside that, so I'll show you that as we go. And then we may even finish off this episode with the LS in the engine bay of the car, which is, as I say, on one hand it's a little bit scary, on the other hand it's super exciting. So I'm really looking forward to it. All in all though, it means more new parts are being installed, it means more cooling around under the car, more drilling at the transmission tunnel. So we've got a lot to come, so stay tuned. First of all, I'm gonna have my dad come around the workshop and just help me install a couple of bits of flywheel, clutch and gearbox mount and so on. So let's dive into that. I'll do some voiceover. I'll show you around it all when we're done. So here we go. Let's crack into it. See you on the other side. Right, so fairly easy task here. We're just getting the flywheel, clutch and clutch cover plate on. First off, we have to hammer in the pilot bearing. After that, we just have to bolt on the flywheel, obviously making sure to clean all the surfaces of the shipping oil it gets coated in. For the whole thing, we used a clutch alignment tool. Of course, this helps to line everything up, and so when it comes time to put the gearbox on, we're not going to have any issues with the splines being unaligned. Just making sure to torque everything down properly. There's a number of torque stages, and it's better to torque things down in a star pattern, just to make sure the force is spread evenly across the piece. And the same goes for the clutch cover plate. After all this, the next stage is just to mate the gearbox and engine together. Fairly simple. Let's get into that, shall we? Right, so here we go. You would have just seen me and my dad fitting the clutch and flywheel to the engine here, and that's gone in there super nicely, so that's all good. The next step would be to fit the gearbox to the engine, and of course after that it could just go in the engine bay. But let's have a look at that gearbox mount, shall we? So if we come down here, you'll see that these are mounted up quite nicely into the chassis rails of the car, also up into the sheet metal of the transmission tunnel here. Let's have a look at the other side, shall we? And the bolts for these essentially go right through chassis rail and sheet metal. You've got these nice spreader plates to spread the load and make these super strong. And I have to say they are super strong. You could probably lift your body weight on the gearbox mount down there, which is good. I did have to do a little bit of extra work just to flatten out the floor here. And as well as that, I have another tip, which is essentially these two bolts here go through a chassis rail, and they can have a tendency to crush the chassis rail and crush or crack the floor. Let me show you what I mean. So as you can see on screen now, essentially this is a bit of a horror story in that someone was tightening up those bolts, and because it goes through a chassis rail, eventually just gets crushed by the bolt you're tightening, it cracked the floor. So I wanted to avoid that. So you can imagine here, if this was your chassis rail, you know, box essentially, it wouldn't be closed on the other end like this is. Eventually it would, but not where the bolt's going through. And if you were to tighten a bolt, you would just eventually crumple and crush the box. However, if you put a tube in there, often called a crush tube, and for lack of a better example, there we go. If you put a tube in between the chassis rail and you try and crush that, it's just a million times harder. And if you've got a bolt going through that tube, then it's even harder still. So that's a very easy way to strengthen things like this. And I essentially did that with these little bits of stainless tube here, as you can see, about 35 millimeters long, 2 millimeters thick, stainless, so it shouldn't rust. Inserted those up into the chassis rail, put the bolt through them, tighten them down. It meant the bolt got super tight, didn't obviously eventually just crush the chassis rail or crack the floor, and it added a ton of structural rigidity. So hopefully for years or even decades to come, no matter what force the gearbox mount is subjected to, it should be super strong forever. Easy little bit of preventative work there. But anyway, enough jibber jabber. Let's get you and you matched together, and let's get the pair of you in there. Let's get on to it. Now you might be thinking it's time to get the engine in the car, right? Wrong. I'll tell you why now. So this is a couple of weeks on now, and what you're probably about to see when we do get the engine finally in the car is going to be probably the third, perhaps even fourth attempt at doing so. And that's just one of those things with engine swaps. You have to keep trying in and out, trying to get it to actually fit and clear everything and make sure it's not making contact where, you know, it doesn't need to be or crushing anything and so on. So let me get you off now. I'll show you around where we've hit snags and explain where we're going to go from there. Right, so here we go. Got the engine and gearbox together. You wouldn't have seen us putting the gearbox on the engine because I actually deleted that footage, so good job, Sam. But this is all looking very good, and you can see just how large the gearbox is now when compared to the engine. I had to make some clearancing on the gearbox here. It has these great big aluminium lugs. There was one there, one here, 4 down here to protect this connector, like these spikes to stop anything from bashing it. Obviously, I've now cut those off. Over on the engine side, looks like a right mess, doesn't it? Firstly, I had issues with the anti-roll bar. The kit is designed to go over the anti-roll bar. The kit is designed and comes with these spacers, which are designed to go kind of in the subframe there, and then down the anti-roll bar mounts, and vice versa. Of course, what that would do is essentially lift the body of the car up or drop the subframe down a little bit. And these are mainly for exhaust clearance. Now, I'd sooner take a hammer to the exhaust to clear it rather than do that. And the reason for that is because anyone that knows suspension and knows geometry knows that that is going to mess around with your geometry, your everything when it comes to the front end of suspension. And of course, technically, it's going to make the whole subframe sit a little bit lower in comparison to the car. So when I'm driving along trying to get it to look nice and cool, all lowered out, it's actually sitting this much lower. So not doing these has made things just a little bit tighter when it comes to getting the engine in. So I had to ditch the anti-roll bar. I'll refit that once the engine's in, because it should have plenty of clearance to go in once it's in. It's just trying to get it past there, which is the tricky part. I had plenty of clearance issues down here. It's not so much the heat shield's fault. It's not actually crazy thick. It's just so tight, and as things are swinging around, it's bashing it and so on. But as you can see, it still looks all right. Just got a few dents in it. Next one, glaring one, is the wiring, obviously. With the harness I'm going to be using, I had no need for the big engine wiring loom connector, which is this gigantic 50-something, 52-pin connector. As you can see, I've chopped out. Don't go screaming at your screens. I have made a note of what all these pins do. Some of them are grounded. I've made a little grounding loom here to ground these off. A lot of them, quite literally this whole lot, is all useless. It's all old engine management stuff, and the other ends of these plugs are all disconnected and aren't going to be reconnected into the new ECU. So that's all to get chopped out. I might not necessarily pull them all the way through the car. I perhaps could do, but I think that's just going to be a hell of a lot more work. It's going to be unraveling all of this loom and so on. But the reason for all of that is just to try and thin down this loop that goes over the top of the engine. To cut away some of this, they had these hard plastic L's that made the loom very, very tight, and it mounted the loom to the firewall, which is nice, but they're just so big and bulky that the engine's hitting them as it's trying to go in. So cutting those out, tidying up the wiring, doing all this now while I've still got the last chance to do so, because a lot of this is going to be inaccessible once the engine's in. That's where we are with this absolute bombshell. Whole workshop looks like an absolute mess of everything out on the floor. This is where we are. So I'm going to finish up this. I might have a chance to show you the finished product, and then we will swing the engine in again for attempt number 3. Catch you then. Right, and here we go, the finished result. As you can see, it looks so much cleaner now. So I cut out the big AC1 engine harness connector and its little AC2 buddy. And of course, that drove the old engine, did all the sensors, the AC2 connectors, all the injectors. So obviously none of that's needed because all of that's going to be supplied by the new harness I get. And obviously I went through every single pin. There was a couple I needed to keep. I've got a few of them up here. Things like, I have ones like this, which is the reverse light switch. Obviously when you go into reverse on the gearbox, this tells these two little wires tell the reverse lights to come on. You got the starter motor signal. Might not need this, but kept it around just in case. Got a few others like the oil pressure light for the dash. Of course, if I don't end up needing this, then I just cut it back further and insulate it, and it's all safe. But I just thought I'd keep that separate just in case I need it. Likewise, there's a few over here, things at oil temperature or water temperature and so on. Just they might need to be grounded. If not, they can get cut back. And of course, this has resulted in a bit thinner. Obviously, it's much thinner here than it is down here, pre-thinned out. Much more flexible, and obviously doesn't have that big T-piece coming down here. And that hopefully should just make it much easier to get the engine around these bits, around here. And obviously I'm going to have a second harness coming in, so just the thinner everything can be, the more room we can get and the better. So yeah, good stuff. It's all finished off in Tessa tape, so it's nice and insulated and safe and so on. And yeah, let's finally have a go at getting the engine in again. Round 3, who knows, perhaps 4, 7, 1,000, who knows. Hopefully next time you see this, it'll have an engine in it. Just dive into it. Oh God, we've gone past the bolts, lads. We've gone past. No f***ing cheering, he says.
We chest bump. That's all.
That's right, we got the engine in. After about 7 odd attempts, we got it down to a bit of an art, I must say. And obviously there was a few struggles when it came to getting it in, but we managed it eventually, largely just around the kind of areas around the gearbox here, down here, and again on this side, although it's not as bad. It was just super, super tight. Unfortunately, we had to make a couple of compromises. One of those was unfortunately my nice custom heat shield that I made last episode. Had to remove that to get the engine in, but I'm thinking of adapting it and getting it to refit. Might just be cutting off these sections here. But here we go. We've got a couple of other issues as well. For example, this is just laid on there. It's not bolted down or even tight. It's not even all the way back yet because the brake booster output off the back of the inlet manifold is obviously very close to the heater pipes here, even though they've been cut down considerably. Plus, it needs to go that way. So I'm thinking of cutting it off, plastic welding up the back of the inlet manifold and putting in a new barbs adapter that kind of shoots it that way a bit. But we're going to get into all of that next episode. Just feels like a massive milestone to have it finally in on its own mounts. And we did it without fitting those subframe spacers, meaning the sump doesn't hang down past the chassis, which is fantastic. So much to start doing next episode. I really can't wait. I want to do things like get the oil filter relocation kit on, can fit the new brake lines for the rear brakes, can fit the exhaust manifold. I've got new parts to fit. Finally going to get rid of these nasty valve covers. I've ordered some new ones, so they're on their way. Need to run a fuel line, run the wiring. So much to do. So I think that's where we're going to get into it on the next episode. So that's it, really. I hope you're as excited to see this in here as I am. Obviously, it's such a massive milestone. I almost can't. I've been sending a picture of it to literally everyone, just so pleased that it's finally in there. As I say, I think on the next episode, we're going to start installing new parts on it. Really, just it's a case of plumbing, wiring, and then hopefully the car could be running and driving. So obviously you want to stay tuned for that in the next episode. It's amazing how much room's in there around the engine. Obviously it used to hold a big wide boxer engine. Let me know what you think of it down below in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this episode, give it a like as always, and even consider subscribing to the channel, especially if you want to keep in touch to watch more as we go on. Anyway, I'll quit talking here. I'll let you guys get on, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching as always. Cheers. Bye bye for now.